I've lived on this piece of land for over 40 years now. It's a beautiful 5-acre plot just outside of town, with a cozy ranch house, a big red barn, and plenty of room for my horses to roam. The kind of space that settles the soul, you know? When I first bought this property back in 1983, it was surrounded by nothing but open fields and farmland as far as the eye could see, and I loved that quiet solitude. But as the years went by, the suburb slowly crept closer and closer. About 15 years ago, a fancy new housing development called Pine Ridge Estates sprung up on the land adjacent to mine. Suddenly, I had neighbors with their manicured lawns and their cookie-cutter houses. It wasn't ideal, but I figured we could coexist peacefully as long as they respected my property line. For the most part, things were fine at first. I kept to myself, and the new neighbors didn't bother me much. But then, the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association started getting more aggressive. At first, it was just passive-aggressive letters in my mailbox, urging me to maintain my property to community standards. I ignored those, of course. My land wasn't part of their development, and I had no obligation to follow their rules. But things really came to a head last month when I decided to repaint my barn. The old red paint was faded and peeling, so I figured a fresh coat would spruce things up. I went with a nice, bright red, just like it had always been, a deep, honest Texas red. Apparently, this didn't sit well with the homeowner association. The day after I finished painting, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Carolyn Jenkins, the homeowner association president, standing there with a pinched look on her face. "Mr. Vance," she said, not even bothering with a greeting, "that barn color is not approved by the Architectural Review Committee. You'll need to repaint it in an earth tone to comply with our community aesthetic guidelines." I blinked at her, momentarily stunned by the sheer audacity. Then I let out a bark of laughter. "Carolyn, I appreciate you stopping by, but you seem to be confused. My property isn't part of Pine Ridge Estates. I've owned this land for decades, long before your development even existed. Your homeowner association has no authority over me or my barn." Carolyn's face reddened. "Now see here, Mr. Vance. All properties in this area fall under homeowner association jurisdiction. You can't just opt out because you don't like the rules. That garish red barn is an eyesore, and it's bringing down property values. You have 30 days to repaint it or you'll be fined." I shook my head, trying to stay patient. "Carolyn, I'm telling you, I'm not a member of your homeowner association. Never have been, never will be. This is private property, and I'll paint my barn whatever color I damn well please. Now please get off my land." I shut the door in her face before she could respond. I figured that would be the end of it, but boy was I wrong. The next few weeks were a constant barrage of threats and harassment from the homeowner association. First came the official violation notices, threatening ever-increasing fines if I didn't repaint the barn. I sent those right back with a letter from my lawyer, Jim Collins, reiterating that I wasn't subject to homeowner association rules. Then they started sending people to take photos of my property, claiming they were documenting violations. I put up no trespassing signs, but that didn't seem to deter them. Things escalated further when they hired a landscaping crew to come onto my property and start planting shrubs along my fence line without my permission. I caught them in the act and ordered them off my land. The crew seemed confused, saying the homeowner association had authorized the work. I told them the homeowner association had no right to authorize anything on my property and sent them packing. I thought that would finally get the message across, but instead, it only seemed to enrage Carolyn and her homeowner association cronies further. The final straw came last Saturday afternoon. I was out in the pasture brushing down my horses when I heard a commotion by the house. I walked over to investigate and found 2 police cruisers parked at my driveway. Carolyn was there, gesticulating wildly as she talked to the officers. When she saw me approach, she pointed dramatically. "That's him, officers. He's been ignoring homeowner association violations for weeks, and now he's obstructing our efforts to bring the property up to code. I want him arrested for trespassing and vandalism." I stood there in shock for a moment, unable to believe what I was hearing. One of the officers, a young guy who looked fresh out of the academy, started walking towards me with a hand on his belt. "Sir, I'm going to need you to put your hands where I can see them," he said. That snapped me out of my daze. Now hold on, just a minute, I said, keeping my hands visible but not raising them. There's been a huge misunderstanding here. This is my property. I'm not trespassing, and I'm certainly not vandalizing anything. I've owned this land for 40 years. The older officer stepped forward, looking skeptical. Sir, we received a complaint from the Homeowners Association about multiple violations and your refusal to comply with community guidelines. They've provided documentation showing all properties in this area are subject to Homeowner Association regulations. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Officer, I understand you're just doing your job, but that documentation is incorrect. My property predates the Pine Ridge development and was never incorporated into their homeowner association. I have the deed and property records to prove it. This woman, I said, gesturing to Carolyn, has been harassing me for weeks because she refuses to accept that fact. Carolyn spluttered indignantly. That's a lie. He's trying to weasel out of following the rules that everyone else has to abide by. Just look at that hideous red barn. And he ripped out the lovely landscaping we installed last week. You mean the landscaping you had planted on my property without my permission? I shot back. That's the real trespassing and vandalism here. The older officer held up his hands. All right, let's everyone calm down. Mr. Vance, do you have documentation proving your property isn't part of the homeowner association? I nodded. Yes, sir, I do. It's all in my home office. Would you like to see it? He nodded. I think that would be best. Ma'am, he said, turning to Carolyn, I'm going to need to see your documentation as well. Carolyn's face had gone from red to pale. I don't have it with me, but I assure you our lawyers have reviewed everything. This property is definitely under homeowner association jurisdiction. The officer didn't look convinced. Ma'am, we're going to need to see official records, not just your assurance. Mr. Vance, please lead the way to your office. I brought the officers inside and pulled out my property deed, along with surveys clearly showing my land boundaries. I also had copies of the original Pine Ridge development plans, which I'd obtained years ago. Those plans clearly showed my property as a separate parcel, not included in the development. The officers reviewed everything carefully. After about 20 minutes, the older one nodded and turned to his partner. Rogers, go explain the situation to the complainant. I'll finish up in here. The younger officer nodded and headed outside. The older one, whose nameplate read Anderson, turned back to me. Mr. Vance, I apologize for the confusion earlier. Your documentation is in order, and it's clear your property is not subject to homeowner association regulations. You were well within your rights to remove unauthorized landscaping from your land. I let out a relieved sigh. Thank you, Officer Anderson. I appreciate you taking the time to review everything thoroughly. Of course. Now, I have to ask, would you like to press charges against the Homeowner Association for trespassing and vandalism? You'd have a solid case based on the unauthorized landscaping work. I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted to teach Carolyn and her busybody friend a lesson. But ultimately, I shook my head. No, I don't think that's necessary. I'm just glad this misunderstanding is cleared up. Although, I added, I would appreciate it if you could have a word with them about respecting my property rights going forward. Officer Anderson nodded. I'll make sure they understand the situation clearly. And Mr. Vance, if you have any further issues with harassment from the Homeowner Association, please don't hesitate to call the station and report it. We walked back outside to find Carolyn in tears, blubbering to the younger officer. When she saw me emerge with Officer Anderson, she started towards us with a wild look in her eye. This isn't over, Vance. Our lawyers will. Ma'am, Officer Anderson cut her off sharply. I strongly advise you not to finish that sentence. We've reviewed Mr. Vance's documentation, and it's clear his property is not part of your homeowner association. Any further attempts to enforce your regulations on his land could be considered harassment. Carolyn's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. But the property values. That awful barn. He can, and he will. Anderson interrupted again. Mr. Vance has every right to paint his barn whatever color he chooses. Now, we've determined this call was unfounded. I should warn you that making false reports to the police is a serious offense. I'm letting you off with a warning this time, But if it happens again, you could face charges. Do you understand? Carolyn nodded meekly, all the fight suddenly gone out of her. Good, Anderson continued. Now I suggest you leave Mr. Vance's property immediately and refrain from contacting him further unless it's through proper legal channels. Have a good day, folks. With that, the officers got in their cruisers and drove off. Carolyn stood there for a moment, shooting daggers at me with her eyes, before turning on her heel and storming off down the road. I breathed a sigh of relief, hoping this would finally be the end of the homeowner association nonsense. But little did I know, this was just the beginning of a much bigger battle. It's been about 6 months since that showdown with Carolyn and the police, and I wish I could say that was the end of it. But, of course, things are never that simple when you're dealing with petty tyrants like the Pine Ridge Homeowner Association. For a few weeks after the police incident, things were blessedly quiet. I thought maybe Carolyn and her cronies had finally gotten the message. But then the letters started arriving, not from the Homeowner Association this time, but from some fancy law firm in the city. They claimed that despite my property predating the development, it was still subject to homeowner association rules due to some obscure legal principle called implied consent. Apparently, because I hadn't formally objected when the homeowner association was first established, I had tacitly agreed to be part of it. It was complete nonsense, of course, but that didn't stop them from threatening a lawsuit if I didn't comply with their demands. I'll admit, for a moment there, I was worried. I'm not a rich man, and the thought of getting dragged into a lengthy legal battle was daunting. But then I remembered something my old man used to say, "Son, sometimes you've got to stand your ground, even when it ain't easy." So I took those letters to my lawyer, Jim Collins. Jim's been handling my legal affairs for years, and he's about as no-nonsense as they come. He read through the Homeowner Association's claims and let out a snort. "Tom," he said, "this wouldn't hold up in any court in the state. They're trying to scare you into compliance, but they don't have a legal leg to stand on." That was all I needed to hear. Jim drafted up a strongly worded response, basically telling the Homeowner Association's lawyers where they could stick their implied consent. He also threw in a counter threat of a harassment lawsuit if they didn't back off. We didn't hear anything for a while after that, and I thought maybe that was the end of it. But then one Saturday morning in early spring, I woke up to find a group of people gathered at the edge of my property, right by the road. As I got closer, I realized it was Carolyn and about a dozen other Pine Ridge residents, holding up signs that said things like "No more eyesores" and "Protect our property values." I couldn't believe it. They were actually picketing my house. I marched right up to Carolyn, my temper rising. "What do you think you're doing?" I demanded. Carolyn put on a sickly sweet smile. "Oh, we're just exercising our right to peaceful protest, Mr. Vance. We want to raise awareness about how your refusal to comply with community standards is hurting all of us." I shook my head in disbelief. "Carolyn, we've been over this. My property isn't part of your community. You have no right to demand anything from me." "We'll see about that," she sniffed. "Our lawyers assure us we have a strong case. Why don't you just save us all a lot of trouble and paint that horrible barn?" I noticed a couple of cars slowing down as they passed. People were starting to stare at the commotion. That's when I realized this wasn't just about pressuring me. This was a publicity stunt. Instead of arguing further, I just turned and walked back to my house. I had a few calls to make. First, I rang up Officer Anderson at the police station. I explained the situation and asked if there was anything they could do. He said that as long as the protesters stayed on public property and didn't block traffic, there wasn't much they could do, but he promised to send a patrol car by regularly to make sure things didn't get out of hand. Next, I called Jim. He listened to my rundown of the situation and let out a long sigh. "They're pushing their luck, Tom," he said. "This is bordering on harassment. Tell you what, let me make a few calls. I've got an idea." True to his word, Jim got the ball rolling. By that afternoon, a reporter from the local newspaper showed up. Turns out, Jim had tipped them off about the David versus Goliath story unfolding. A longtime resident being harassed by an overzealous homeowner association. The reporter, a sharp young woman named Sarah, interviewed me about the ongoing dispute. I showed her all my documentation proving my property wasn't part of Pine Ridge, as well as the threatening letters from the homeowner association's lawyers. Then we walked over to where Carolyn and her group were still protesting. "Mrs. Jenkins," Sarah called out, I'm with the Daily Herald. Care to comment on why your homeowner association is protesting against a property that legally isn't part of your development? Carolyn looked like a deer in headlights. She stammered something about community standards and property values, but it was clear she wasn't prepared for this kind of scrutiny. The story ran in the Sunday paper, and it was like a bomb went off in our little community. The article painted a clear picture of an overbearing homeowner association trying to bully an innocent homeowner. The comment section of the online version was flooded with people sharing their own homeowner association horror stories. But the real turning point came a few days later. I was out feeding the horses when a car I didn't recognize pulled up. A middle-aged man in a suit got out and introduced himself as Robert Falk, a member of the Pine Ridge Homeowner Association Board. "Mr. Vance," he said, looking uncomfortable, "I was hoping we could talk." I nodded cautiously and invited him in for a coffee. As we sat at my kitchen table, Robert got straight to the point. "That newspaper article has stirred up a lot of trouble," he said. "We've been flooded with calls and emails from residents questioning the homeowner association's actions. Some are even talking about disbanding the homeowner association entirely." I couldn't help but smile a little at that. "Well, Mr. Falk, maybe that'll teach Carolyn to mind her own business." He nodded slowly. "Yes, well, the board has had a lengthy discussion, and we've come to a decision. We're prepared to officially recognize that your property is not part of Pine Ridge Estates and is not subject to our regulations. In return, we're hoping you'll agree not to pursue any legal action against the homeowner association for the misunderstandings of the past few months." I leaned back in my chair, considering his offer. Part of me wanted to tell him where he could stick his offer after all the hassle they put me through. But then I thought about the potential for a long, drawn-out legal battle, even if I was in the right. "All right," I said finally. "I'll agree to that on one condition. I want in writing, notarized, that my property is exempt from all current and future homeowner association rules. And I want a public apology from Carolyn for the harassment." Robert winced at that last part, but nodded. "I think we can manage that. Thank you for being reasonable about this, Mr. Vance. I know it's been a difficult situation." True to their word, the homeowner association delivered a notarized document the very next day, officially recognizing my property is separate from Pine Ridge Estates. And at the next homeowner association meeting, which I got to attend as an observer, Carolyn stood up and gave a grudging apology for the misunderstanding regarding my property. It wasn't the most sincere apology I've ever heard, but it was enough. As I walked out of that meeting, several Pine Ridge residents came up to shake my hand and congratulate me on standing my ground. These days, things are pretty quiet around here. My barn is still as red as ever, and I haven't gotten so much as a dirty look from Carolyn in weeks. I even noticed a couple other houses in Pine Ridge sporting some colorful new paint jobs. Seems like my stand against the homeowner association inspired a few others to assert their individuality. Looking back, I'm glad I stuck to my guns. It would have been easier to give in and repaint the barn, but some things are worth fighting for. This land has been my home for 4 decades, and nobody has the right to tell me how to live on it. As for Carolyn and the homeowner association, I hear they've been keeping a much lower profile lately. Rumor has it that there's a movement among the residents to significantly reduce the homeowner association's powers. I can't say I'm sad to hear it. In the end, I guess the whole ordeal taught me something my daddy always used to say: stand up for what's right, even if you're standing alone. Turns out, if you stand your ground long enough, you might just find you're not alone after all. Tell me, what's the craziest thing your HOA has ever tried to fine you for? Drop a comment below. Hit the like button if you think historic property rights should always trump HOA bylaws. And subscribe if you want to hear more stories about standing up to the clipboard tyrants.